regardless of the scale of how freaked out people were, we know it was. And, the first few bulletins, I was going to say, the first few bulletins that we talked about there, they're kind of, and this is what makes it, feel so real, because there's some boring parts of this, but it's boring on purpose. The first few bulletins, they're interrupted by, a program of dance music, and we're sitting there, like getting lulled into a false sense of security by this thing. And you've got a series of, hot explosions observed on Mars, and this is really where things start to take off, at least slowly. And you've got this Professor Pearson, and you've got this supposedly unrelated report of an unusual object falling on a farm in Grover's Mill, New Jersey. And then, of course, this is most people's first experience of Grover's Mill, because it is small town USA, and I mean super small town. Not a big town at all. Had you ever even heard of Grover's Mill if it wouldn't be for the War of the Worlds Lake? I mean, let's be honest.
Probably not. And to be fair, I know what it's like to be in a small town. When I wrote my first two books, I was living in Adams, which had a population of 864 people or something like that. So I get small town. Obviously Adams had the Bell Witch Plantation, and this place had, the War of the Worlds. So.
Absolutely. Well, then after, you get the falling object, you get a brief musical interlude, and this is kind of sprinkled in at the start. It's interrupted by a live report from Grover's Mill now, where you've got police officers, crowd of curious onlookers, and they're all kind of surrounding the strange cylindrical object, basically UFO. And it kind of escalates when these tentacled Martians, and we don't know that they're Martians yet, but it kind of explains it as we go. And that's the interesting thing is, in 1938, it was conceivable that there could be life on Mars. Now, not so much, right?
Right. But again, limited technology back then, people's imaginations were just wide open. We didn't have the science to disprove things like that. And again, you didn't have TV and all that other kind of stuff. So kind of you relied on your imagination and limited technology. You don't, at the time, it's just growing up, I used to hear, we live without air conditioning. When you don't have air conditioning, you don't know you're missing anything. Bam. So.
Exactly. And, that's the interesting thing is that, the time period's just so different from ours, so you kind of have to put yourself in 1938 to really get the, the full effect. But when I talk about the way that these Martians look, if you want a good example of what they look like, watch Independence Day. That is a War of the Worlds remake if there ever was one. Or you could watch War of the Worlds by Steven Spielberg. Now, they're not Martians in that movie, and they're not Martians in Independence Day because, again, this is the whole modern twist on it, because we know that there's not this type of life on Mars. But you do get the description from H.G. Wells and Orson Welles here of what these Martians look like. So anyway, these things, they're as large as a bear. They've got tentacles. They're just horrible to look at. V-shaped mouth, saliva dripping from it. They come out from this cylinder, and they attack the surrounding people using this thing called a heat ray. And it basically cuts off the mechanical filter. I can't think of his name right now. Carl something. Anyway, he gets killed on the scene. But this is kind of followed by a series of rapid, increasingly disturbing and alarmed news reports detailing an alien invasion that's taking place around the world, specifically in this area. And this portion of the show actually kind of stops with another live report describing giant Martian war machines releasing clouds of poisonous smoke in New York City. And these giant war machines, again, described in the H.G. Wells novel, the tripods. And I think this is the tripods are kind of what this story is most known for. I mean, even the look of the aliens is something if you ask somebody on the street, they wouldn't know. But tripods, I feel like that's pretty connected to the story, don't you?
Oh yeah, I mean, especially think of the weapons. I mean, think of Star Trek, tricorder. Bam. And like instruments, space instruments. Like, seems like that War of the Worlds influenced not only an entire generation of writers, but an entire generation of television, series creators and stuff. I mean, I would have almost ventured to say that without War of the Worlds, Star Trek and Star Wars might not have been what they were in those areas with the weaponry and, space ideas and stuff like that.
You make a good point. And to further your point from earlier about how the realism of this broadcast, they don't get their first radio break until after you've got these clouds of poisonous smoke in New York City. So a whole lot of stuff's gone down before you even get your first break in this. So if you tune in 10 minutes into the radio broadcast and you hear, newspaper reporters at the scene of a flying saucer crash, and then you hear everybody getting wiped out, what are you supposed to think? This is before the times where people were skeptical of such things. It's, it's kind of like people that are like, that we all mock the Salem witch trials, and I go back to our little our podcast from the 16th that I was on, and we all mock the people from that, but like in 1692, witchcraft was real. The devil was real. All that shit was real. It was undisputed. This wasn't something where it was like, it's just kind of an opinion. It's a radical opinion. Everybody fucking believed it. So, same deal here. I mean, if they're telling you it on the radio and it's presented like it's real, why wouldn't you believe it?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And again, we're talking about time periods here. Salem, Massachusetts, 1692, there wasn't television and newspaper and Twitter and internet and all that other bullshit. It was just word of mouth, taken from people that were deemed to be credible sources. And when you don't have any other source to question that, you don't know anything different, like we said earlier with air conditioning, when you don't know something exists, you can't miss it. You can't want it. You can't need it if you don't know it's there. So people who tune into this radio station, they hear about people getting killed on the scene and tentacled monsters coming out of a spacecraft dripping saliva and heat rays. They're probably sitting there thinking, what in the actual fuck is going on?
Exactly. And again, it was tumultuous times. You know what I mean? If something like this had hit right after 9/11, think about what people would be thinking had this never existed. And then something like this comes out where it's presented as fact, at least for the first part. And people are just
You're influenced by what you know. Absolutely. If a War of the Worlds hadn't happened, and 9/11, obviously did happen, and just in that timeline, if 9/11 had occurred and War of the Worlds had not, and you got some kind of a broadcast about a flying foreign object crashing into a building and it getting blown up, or there's something like that, people are going to think, oh my God, this is a recurrence of this past event, because they only know what's around them. They only know what's in the news around them, what they hear and what they see.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a great precursor to like. And this is a Twilight Zone episode, and I know you like Twilight Zone. I don't know if you're a huge fan, but the monsters are due on Maple Street. So if you're familiar with that episode, I mean, it's all about, suggestion. All it takes is to sprinkle that, little bit of doubt in people, and they...
Paranoia at its finest.
Make it worse.
It's a weapon. Yeah, it's a weapon. And I wasn't glorifying, or just to clarify for anybody listening, 9/11, I'm not making fun of that incident. I'm merely pointing out that if something like War of the Worlds had not happened and did happen in a post-9/11 world, the only thing we could think of as a collective society would be like, this seems familiar to something we already know, meaning a disaster where something has hit a building and there's a great loss of life and all that. I was merely pointing out we only know, what we learn around us in our environment. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I didn't want it to be construed as I was poking fun or making light of 9/11, because that's not the case.
I don't think you came off that way at all, but you know how people are, so fair enough. It's good you gave that disclaimer. Okay, so the second half of the show, it's more of a, the typical conventional radio drama format. So if you only listen to that part of it, you wouldn't think anything's amiss. But again, it's all about the first half. But anyway, in the second half of the show, just kind of do the long and short of it, it follows a survivor. Again, Professor Pearson is who we're talking about, dealing with kind of the aftermath of the invasion and the Martian occupation of their Earth. I mean, all this shit goes down really fast. It's like boom, 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 boom. And just like in the original novel, the story ends with the discovery that the Martians have been defeated by germs rather than the humans, basically is killed by the common cold. And, they did a spin-off of that in Independence Day when a computer virus is the thing that takes them down.
Or my wife pointed out signs with water. The water killed the aliens in signs, Yeah.
Exactly. Same type of thing, though. Coordinated attack across the entire world, with these objects that have landed all over the place. It is very similar. It's amazing the influence that War of the Worlds, the story, and not just the radio broadcast, have had, over time. And, this was only a 60-minute broadcast, but I feel like its effects are still being felt to this day. I mean, the illusion of realism was kind of, again, furthered because Mercury Theater in the Air was holding a show without commercial interruptions. And, again, let me reiterate this. The first break in the program came almost 30 minutes after the intro. So that's a long time to go and go and go.
Yeah, absolutely.
For the performers. Think about that. Without a break.
Well, but then again, you've got a seasoned performer like Orson Welles, who was already a classically trained actor who's used to doing stuff like that. Which this basically sort of put him on the map even more because this is pre-Citizen Kane. I mean, if I remember correctly. So, I mean, this kind of put him on the map, but as an actor, he was used to giving these impressively long monologues and stuff like that. So, yeah, it was a bit of I think it was more, in my opinion, and this is where we differ, Travis, I think it was a bigger thing for the audience to have to deal with than the performers because these performers are used to it. But these people at home, they're just listening. They're used to having commercial breaks and stuff, and all of a sudden there's not any, and they're afraid to tune away because they're afraid they're going to miss some catastrophic thing happening because they weren't listening. It's craziness, the fear, the anxiety,
Yeah, definitely. And our country was rife with it at that time. I believe it was during the Depression. The 30s was the Depression. I don't remember how long it went on, but 38 seems appropriate.
Oh, we were still feeling the effects. I think the major depression was over. We were still recovering as an economy, as a country,
Mm-hmm. And it should be mentioned that this actually took place between 8 and 9 p.m. Eastern, so prime time. And the popular legend goes that some of the radio audience may have been listening to the Chase and Sanborn Hour with Edgar Bergen. And what happened is they tuned into War of the Worlds during a musical interlude, and then so they missed the clear intro that the show was a drama. And then, but the thing about that is, modern research kind of suggests that only happened in rare cases. But again, it still proves that there was an impact there. And then, of course, in the days after the adaptation where this aired, you had a widespread, like, just people pissed, upset in the media. The program's news bulletin format was described as deceptive by some of the newspapers and public figures. Let me just say also that newspapers had a reason to call it that because the radio was the enemy to them. It was hurting, print because that was the primary source of news. And then radio comes around. It's kind of like what the Internet has done to the newspapers. The newspapers have just dealt with all sorts of different forms of media for years and years and years. And really this was the first alternative to newspapers, wasn't it?
Well, besides television, again, you had radio was the direct enemy of newspaper, and then television was the direct enemy of the radio, and then the Internet was the direct enemy of television. So it's kind of like a vicious cycle, you know what I'm saying?
It is. Everything's trying to get ahead of everything else, and the newspapers are just far behind. And it's amazing to me that newspapers even still exist.
I still feel it as an author, as somebody that sells best-selling books. I still feel it. because there are people, I still get fans asking me all the time, well, when is this going to be released